All right. I agree with what's been said earlier, that this is possibly one of the most contentious issues in the country at the moment. What I don't understand is why. And what I find somewhat disconcerting about discussions or seminars like this, while I appreciate the sentiments of the speakers before me, all three of them, we tend to avoid or dodge the subject that we have a constitution. And that constitution was put in place in 1957. And in that constitution it says that the constitution is the supreme law of the land. And that's the end of the discussion. And that should be the end of the discussion, really. All right. So, when we talk of this subject, and this is really my first point, when we talk of this subject, what we're actually doing is discussing whether we want to abide by constitutionalism or not. Because the conversation has gone from one which was about the Constitution from 1957 to about the mid-90s, when the Islamization campaign started more aggressively at the hands of UMNO, to one which is now what is the social, the role of Islam in society, a revisionist perspective of constitutional law. In effect, a backdoor method to try and change the basic structure of the society. And that's really what the debate's about. And I think it's important to understand why it is that debate has started. And it started because, fundamentally, there was a wholesale disregard of the rule of law that took place from the 1980s. So much so that public administrators, our judges, and a wealth of public individuals just don't seem to get it that the line between politics and governance has been completely erased. So, in that sphere, and this takes me into my second point, in that sphere, ideologues have emerged. We have the somewhat, I was going to be rude and use a pejorative term, or else I won't say that. We have these highly insightful ministers who say things in the newspapers all the time, some of them particularly remarkable. And you know, ultimately what it is that this society defines itself, it depends on what the NST decides to print on the front page of the paper. So, you know, if tomorrow Nazri says we're a bunch of Martians, well, so be it, you know, and we'll be discussing what the religion of Mars is. Because that's the reality of this. So the question is, in this context, and this is my second point, who are the victims? Who are the victims of this blurring of the lines? It's so easy to talk about how non-Muslims are affected by this so-called dominance. But what we tend to forget, that the biggest victims in this discussion are actually the Muslims themselves. Because everyone recognizes the freedom of non-Muslims. But people don't seem to want to talk about, and I note how artfully Nurul dodged the subject as well, about what it is that Muslims who have a particular view about the religion do. Right? Everyone dodges that. So the point is, diversity within the religion is as important as it is for us Muslims as it is for all of you. No one's going to stop you from going to a Catholic church or a Protestant church or whatever it is. But we're being told by the state there's only one version of Islam, and that's what the legislature is telling us under the hands of the Fatwa Council and the Majlis Agama. If you don't believe their kind of Islam, you're a deviationist. So that's the reality of it. So in that context then, what we have essentially is monolithic Islam being used for political purpose. And we're all the victims of that process. Because of race and religious rhetoric in politics, Islam has become a very, very important source of vote pulling or vote intimidation, etc. I'm sure some of what Nurul said today, and I'm sure the other member of the Pakatan who's going to speak, Dr. Rawa, I'm sure what they're going to say today is going to be twisted and turned to political end as well. But that's the reality, that at the end of the day, what we're actually dealing with is a political construct that has reduced religion into just this us and them discussion, and we don't give any credence to the nuances of the religion in any form. We don't give any credence to the idea that politics has encroached into the private spheres of all of us as Malaysians in a way that's completely repugnant to the Constitution, and we act as if the Constitution doesn't exist. And that's where we are. So I guess the third point I make now is we know how it came to pass. The question I have for those commentators that follow me is, what do we do to solve the problem? And in this context, I think the Islamic opposition, PAS, should come to understand that when they talk of hudud, it is not only fear of hudud that drives the discussion. It is also fear of a repeat of the kind of nonsense we're seeing now, where the apparatus of state is being used in the name of religion to actually exploit and abuse power. That all of us are being subjugated by forces that are called religious, but in actual fact are nothing more than extensions of the political impetus that drives them. And that is what we're concerned about. At the end of the day, Part 2 of the Constitution says that all of us can live our lives as we want to, in private. The Supreme Court upheld that principle in '88. It said that the public sphere of this country is secular. That decision of the Supreme Court has never been reversed. The Constitution has not been amended since that. Both Dr. Cyrus and I have argued cases where we've said this repeatedly in the federal court. But somehow, when Nazri speaks, or Najib speaks, or whoever it is speaks, all of this doesn't seem to matter because it becomes a might is right scenario. And that cannot be accepted. So we know what's caused it. I guess we'll have to think about what we want to do to solve it. Thank you.
Dr. Chairman, I'm very much inclined to my fellow colleague Malik and the main speaker that presented his paper this morning. In response to that, I have only 2 points. One, as a non-Muslim now, in all humility, I always perceive that Islam is more than just a religion. Islam is very much a political ideology, and its ultimate aim is to establish a political state. But having said so, it seems to me, again, in all humility, that ultimate political state is rather vague at the moment. It depends on whether you're a liberal scholar or an academic or a conservative scholar. It also depends which one of the 4 sects in Islam that you belong to. Malaysia, we take the Sunni and then the subsect of Sufism, interpretation of that ultimate political state. And of course, I've read that some Muslim scholars say such a state have already come into being, giving the example of a state of Medina, and also during the time of the Caliphate. And of course, some say that during the time of Mughal Empire in India, and then today now there are 5 countries are openly professing themselves to be Islamic states. In the Middle East, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Iran. In Africa, you have Sudan. And in the Indian subcontinent, of course, you have Pakistan and Afghanistan. The model as professed by these 5 countries, with greatest respect and humility, I don't think that model has a great following in this country, whether you're Muslim or a non-Muslim. Ultimately, human beings have come a long way. If you look through the system of government that has been experimented over the years, government can be distilled down to basically only 3 forms. 1, an autocracy, a rule of one man. Example, our Junior Kim in North Korea, for example, during the time of Idi Amin in Uganda, the present king of Saudi Arabia, Colonel Gaddafi. And then the second form of government is an oligarchy, a ruler of a few. And the best example we can see is the military junta in Burma. And then lastly, you have a democracy, rule of many. And I like that quotation given by Dr. Farouk. That sums it up. In fact, Winston Churchill says that democracy is a terrible form of government, something to that effect. He said, except all other forms that have been tried and tested are far more terrible. And on this score, we already settled it once and for all in 1957. My fellow colleague Malik Imtiaz had mentioned that. We've forgotten about that. We looked through at the different models of what kind of state and what kind of political system that we want to adopt now. And we came down with this model stated in 1957, reiterated in 1963 in the formation of Federation Malaysia, with the input of Sabah and Sarawak. And that itself now, given the complex, the multiracial, multi-religious setup of our country, a lot of compromise, a lot of thought has been given into it. And it came out with an excellent piece of paper called the Federal Constitution. And indeed, these are the few important elements in it. It's a constitutional monarchy, it's a parliamentary democracy, we have separation of powers, it's a federal system, the Constitution is supreme, we have a written Bill of Rights, and it's all undergirded by constitutionalism and the rule of law. And all citizens are equal citizens, sharing equally in that commonwealth. That has been settled many years ago. But I recognize as a constitutional lawyer, the Constitution is not static. It evolves with the time. And the recent debate is basically a political debate, came about in the early 80s when Dr. M became the Prime Minister of this country. And that's for political reason and political consumption. And we have to go back to revive, to change altogether this Constitution. I think the subject matter is a matter of honor, it's a matter of honesty, it's a matter of integrity. It is something that our forefathers, our founding fathers have already shook hands upon, agreed on that mutual covenant in 1957, reiterated in 1963. Why 55 years later we reopen this debate? In a democracy, we recognize it is a rule of majority, but bearing in mind there's such thing as a protection of the rights of minority. To reopen it, to shift it to a different model, I think it's a matter of honor and honesty at issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera dan peace be upon you. As we mentioned, I've got only 5 minutes to speak. I don't know whether working here also include. Let me tell you just this simple point. Number one, I agree totally with what Dr. Farouk mentioned about the concept of Islamic State. Although there were some points that I disagree when he talked something about parts. Now, I would rather see this discussion readjust the topic as not Islamic State, but Islam and the state. What is important, because if we put the word Islamic State, we will be indulged into discussing the format. I'm here to discuss on the substance, because I believe Islam is for all period of time, and as a believer, no one can question me that. And part of my belief in my faith, state is also part of my belief. So here, we should be more discussing on the substance rather than the form. It doesn't matter whether Saudi is an Islamic state or not, although they ruin all the holy places. It doesn't matter whether Iran is an Islamic state or not, although they did not give freedom. What matters most is, how does Islam interpret politics, democracy, and how it can be part of the mainstream? Being a democratic country, Islamic Party has its long-standing history, especially my party, the Islamic Party. My father was the president of the party. I'm the second generation. Inshallah, my son and my daughter will be the third generation. And I would like also to state here that PAS as an Islamic party is constitutional. It doesn't work the other way around. You may have different opinion on us, but that's okay. That's the beauty of it. That's why I'm here. Now, We come to the question of where does Islam stand in politics? Yes, Islam says a lot about democratic process. If you refer to the verses of Al-Quran in Surah Ali Imran, chapter 4, 159, Allah said, and Dr. Farooq mentioned that in his speech, that Islam rejects authoritarian leadership. That's number one. You can talk about Islam or not, but that's number one. We reject authoritarian leadership. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَظًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ. O Muhammad, the Prophet, if your heart is filled with autocracy, no blessing, people will run away from you. لَمْ فَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَعْفُ عَنْهُمْ. The word may sound very simple, bless them. But bless here means be democratic. Let people talk to you, listen, their problem. Even you do not like them. But, listening is democracy. And then at the end of the ayah, Allah mentioned, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Discuss with them. And shura, as you know, whether it's compatible or not, can be also understood in a way or another, the democratic process of making decision. So here I think this is what we should be discussing. That's number one. So you can say whatever it is, Islamic State or what, we reject authoritarian leadership. We call for consultation. We call for discussion for the public. Number two, we should be discussing on how democracy can flourish justice. Democracy in itself is the best way to flourish justice, because justice is part of the Islamic teaching. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Al-Ma'idah, chapter 6, ayah number 8, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kunu qawwamina lillah, shuhada'a bil qist, wa la yajrimannakum shana'anu qawmin, ala alla ta'dilu, i'dilu huwa aqrabu litaqwa. All the believers, the politicians, me or those who are Muslim politicians should be the believers, as much as the Christian politician or other politician should be the believers, not just a simple politician who just wants their voice to be heard or who wants to become a YB. That's not the issue. That's the ring. Did I hear it right? Right. Okay. So what we do here is to erect justice, and democracy can give that justice. I come back to the second question. Whose responsibility? Not my party, not PKR, not UMNO, of course, and not others. If you ask me this simple question, I tell you the answer is you. You are responsibility to make sure whatever this country wants to be. That's your problem. As far as it is constitutional, has been mentioned by my good friend, lawyer. As far as it is constitutional, fine, do it. But number one, stop autocracy. Number two, fight corruption. Number three, create leaders who are responsible for the people. And number four, which is very important, you must fight racism in whatever form it is. So, just let me conclude, because I know he will just ring the bell for the second time. I would just say this. It is important to establish freedom and democracy rather than discussing whether it is an Islamic state or not. The people should be given good life. And the political leaders should be discussing on how to improve good governance and improve livelihood. This is the utmost important thing. Why are you talking about hudud? People go and steal because the government does not give us good life. People must be given good life. There are no reason for people to steal. So, and the understanding of when you say about Islamic State or hudud, I think this is terrible. Even the Chinese translation of hudud is cutting off people's hands. And that is terribly wrong. I urge all my Chinese friends, please, don't translate that. When you say hudud or Sharia, you say cutting off people's hand. I mean, you are doing injustice to Islam. and mostly to my party, of course. So let me then again clarify the fact that it is not about Islamic State, it's about Islam. And I said, my party is constitutional. We were in a democratic process since 1951. We lose, we won, we fought. Whatever we do, even in Kelantan or in Kedah, has been mentioned by Dr. Farouk about the fatwa ruling, it is not done backdoor. It is done through democratic means. If the people wants us, good. If people doesn't want us, we need to adjust ourselves so that the people will continuously support us. Thank you very much.